everybody, and welcome to Story of the Future Learning Encounter. Our theme is story making and story shaping in a divided world. And I'm really pleased to be here with a friend of mine, PeterBlock, to be in a wide-ranging, we don't know where it's going to go, conversation about story. And you might know Peter as an author. He's done a number of works. One of my favorites, The Answer to How is Yes. And of course, Community, the Structure of Belonging. And you call yourself a citizen of Cincinnati. That's a really great title. So Peter, you've been in a lot of rooms, you've been in a lot of small groups, you've been in a lot of conversations and story sharings. So what are your thoughts about story right now?
Well, it took me a long time to believe that it mattered. I thought I was a facilitator. So I grew up running groups. And luckily I grew up running sensitivity training groups, which required no skill. My first job, I had to say, hi, my name is Peter. We're going to be here for 5 days, and we're going to use what happens between us as a subject matter of our inquiry. And then you go silent and watch people get mad at you. And so it took me a while to realize that the small group and language are transformation. You say, what's the nature? All transformation is linguistic. Is what Warner Earhart taught me, or gave me that language. Context is decisive. So storytelling has a lot of political power, and it has the chance and the only way to reshape, the way I and we show up in the room. And sometimes it gets treated as a form of self-expression. Everybody needs to tell their story. Sometimes it's a defense against transformation. If I've told my story 3 times and tell it a 4th time, then I'm stuck. And so story has most power when it keeps getting recreated. And this is what the narrative therapy people understand so well. And so if you're talking about reshaping the world through story, well, then my story has to keep changing, has to evolve. And so there's no such thing as my story. My favorite quote ever is that in Russia, even the past is unpredictable. And my skill is taking small sentences and treating them as if they change everything. And it's also my neurosis. But if the past is unpredictable, that means whatever I tell you my story I've constructed, I know I was born. I know I had a mother, I had a father, I had a sister, a brother, everything else I made up. And so if I know that my story is a construction, that my attempt at the moment to make meaning, then that sets me free. I'm free to construct any story I want about my future. And so the power of story to me, in addition to its teaching ability, in addition to us closer together, which all have enormous value, is that it's constructed and amenable to change. So in my mind, the work we're doing is to help people give voice to their story first, but then realize they're about to change it. And that's why it's powerful. And that's why we get stuck, because we think the story's true. And I have to explain it again and defend it again and research it again. And so, and sometimes the stories are boring. We don't like to say that, but a small group can be death, especially if there's more than 12 people to go around, slugging around, telling a story, especially if you go in order. That way I know exactly when I'm going to have to speak, so I can check out until the person next to me seems to be getting tired, and then I have to speak. So there's lots of nuances to the use of story. And but it's a great organizing thing, and it's a pathway to authenticity, basically. That the clearer I get and the more willing I am to be vulnerable in the telling of the story, and really vulnerable, then that's the answer to fake news.
So there's almost a thing of coming into the realization of, oh, I'm about to tell a story. I wonder what it is right now. rather than this is what it is.
Here is my story.
Yeah.
My story. And
so that sounds like a simple thing, but it's not an easy thing when so much identity is tied to the story you're carrying.
Exactly. It's a friend of mine, Peter Kestenbaum, says suicide is a good idea, but a bad act. And he says it's a case of mistaken identity.
Hmm.
And so it becomes my identity for the moment, but it's really not who I am. Who I am is kind of unspeakable. So I'm in my, fourth quarter, let's say. And so you're still trying to understand this question. So underneath it all the chit chat and all the style and all the et ceteras, who am I? And you only get that by naming it in front of a stranger, in front of others. So as a tip, whenever I bring people together, I never want people in the room that know each other. Mm-hmm. Or if we break into groups of three, it's always with the stranger, because only when I talk to a stranger can anybody be surprised. And the idea that we think we know each other is just a silly thought. I don't care if we've been together 140 years, And so there's something about that that's powerful and takes us deeper.
So essentially, you could say that community is the story that is arising in the moment between us and is continually being told.
Yes, and created.
And created,
And community is, it's an awkward word. But in my mind, it needs a place to care about. Wendell Berry says if you don't have a sense of place, you have no memories. You have amnesia, and you have no affection. And so, and it needs other people, a group of people that have decided to make something together, even if it's just an hour. So it is, and the community's gotten popular now. I need it because I'm so lonely. In England, I think they have a minister of loneliness. They decided loneliness and isolation is a big enough issue that we're going to have somebody pay attention to it full time. And so I think a lot of the craziness in the world is born of our loneliness and isolation. And it's so deep we don't even know
it. Two people in Denmark wrote a book called Commonity. So commonity is the community and commons together. Mm-hmm. So Søren Hermansen and Tor Nordtranders, who's a philosopher. And their take on it is, in order for a community to exist, it must have a commons. And in order for a commons to exist, it must have a community. And I was thinking deeply about that, because Tor wrote a story, in the Danish train system, there's always a silent cabin. You're supposed to not make any noise. But what happens if somebody's in the silent cabin making noise? Does anybody say anything or not? And he said he was sitting in there, and there was somebody speaking, and he was like, one of those kind of, should I get up? And I think he did in the end, and I realized, silence is a commons, and we're not taking care of it very well.
Beautiful.
Just like children used to be our commons. It used to be you could discipline any child or look at, and it was your responsibility to look after every child too, because that was the future of the community.
Beautiful.
Interesting about what are our commons, what could we dream our commons are now?
Well, I love that connection, because I feel my work now is to restore the commons, reclaim the commons, remember the commons. The common good was lost with enclosure in 17th century England, where I used to be able to make a living off the land, hunting, growing, and turned out that they say, no, we're going to privatize the common land. And so we're into 400 or 500 years of privatization. And so part of my isolation, and the more isolated I am, the more longing I have for safety and being led by a dictator. So the cost of isolation is an authoritarian world, because I'm so easy to control if I were not connected and not part of a common. So it's a big deal. And you're right to connect them. And so our work is to rediscover, reclaim the commons, which means I am responsible for raising your children. A lot of people my age say, my kids are grown, why should I still pay taxes for schools? And I think, no, your kids are not grown. Look at these children running. Those are your children. These are our children. And so that's, I think, what you're doing. That's what you do with your life, is to help restore the commons. And it begins with a conversation. It begins with a conversation that's got something to it. And we can talk about that. It's a beautiful connection.
I like the way you say in the book about community that invitation is a radical act. It's a way of being, it's a radical act.
It is. It is. It means, you know, it's a, then freedom comes into the conversation. So most of my life, I'm busy giving away my freedom in exchange for safety and predictability. And so invitation says, if you come by choice. Where the system world, the normal world, operates by mandate. Tell them they have to be here or give them an incentive to come. We were talking about webinars the other day with somebody, and she said, well, why don't we offer them a prize if they stay the whole time? And I think, is our webinar so that way that if we don't pay them to stay, they want to leave? Why would we want to induce people to stay? And so invitation is a radical. It's the notion that we're here to welcome and make an offer to you as powerfully as we can, but also include a hurdle in it so that if I know that you got here, and sometimes I used to, in India, I worked a lot, and I'd say, how many of you are here by choice? And everybody, all the men sit with their arms closed. And I said, how many were sent here? And they all raised their hands as if they're proud at their servitude. And I thought, okay, we're going to take a break in 10 minutes. If you come back, you came by choice. Because the truth is, people do come by choice, they just don't want to own it. And so the invitation thing has a lot of meaning as a way of thinking. Say, okay, I want you to be invited, I want you here by choice. Now, how you show up when you get here, I don't care. You can be the biggest asshole in the world, I don't care. Thank you for coming. You know, there's no behavioral requirements in the room other than a certain level of civility. But when you're the fact you're in the room, I always take that as a big deal. Even if you came in the room to fight, argue, or to complain about leaving, all the little routines we have. So invitation, especially in an organized world, we don't have faith in invitation. But so in the community world, the commons world, here's you're invited, here's what will be required of you, should you choose to show up. And then you get somewhere. And if people know what's required of them, they'll put up with all kinds of stuff. I did a safety meeting once, and somebody was shot on Saturday night in my neighborhood. And we were going ahead to have a safety meeting on Tuesday anyway. So all kinds of people show up, 140 people. You know, I'm not used to people being interested in anything we're doing. And I said, thank you for coming. We're here to talk about what we can do ourselves to construct a safe neighborhood. And the cameras left. The police sat down as members, and people had a conversation about, this is our neighborhood. How do we construct it? Where the normal conversation is, what are you going to do to make me safe?
It's kind of a radical invitation to show up as you, show up with your commitment, and show up with a opportunity to change the story.
So those are two great statements. So whenever we start, I always ask early, what's the commitment that you are that led you into this room at this moment? And it's quite stunning what people say. I love it rather than where do you work and who are you and where do you come from? One guy, Lee, did this a couple of weeks ago. I said, what's the commitment you are? And he said, My challenge is I have not found anything I'm willing to die for. As soon as he says that, the world changed. And that's the power of story, the power of narrative, is to speak it as a commitment, as a something. And so great questions are just questions that seduce people into choosing, or treating themselves as a choosing person. So I would never ask anybody what your expectations are, because they're always too low. Right? I do ask them, what's the commitment that you are that led you into this room today? And you just can't defend against that question. And you know this perfectly.
If social fabric is it's like the petri dish for something happening.
Yes.
And I know you've said that social fabric's created one room at a time and a small group at a time. But if social fabric is it's the relational field that's going to shift anything that's actually going to make community. And that's one of our dire challenges in our storyline right now. As you said before, we're isolated enough from each other that it's not there, or it feels like it's unraveled to the point it might not come back. What has to shift in our storyline, or the way we see our story, or how we work with story, in order to support that reweaving?
Beautiful. So as soon as you ask that question, you've gone somewhere. You've taken us somewhere. You know, there's certain things that mitigate against social building, social fabric, or social capital. One is the idea of scale.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as you take something that's precious and say, how do we take it to scale? You've killed it. You put a knife in its heart. And as soon as you're in a hurry, nothing will happen. And if by chance you're well funded, you don't have a chance. All right. So people are flooded with these silly ideas. Let's raise some money. Let's do something great. Let's take it to scale and do it as fast as possible. I know if those things are part of our belief system, and I'm exaggerating, okay? Not much. And I know nothing important is going to happen now. So I have to rethink the core tenets of our consumer world. Mm-hmm. Consumerism is what's isolating me. Because it says, I want it now, I want convenience, I don't cook, blah, blah, blah. I want to commodify my home with Airbnb, so now I can rent out my 3 empty rooms. So I've commodified every inch of space. And so you say, what's a post-consumer world? Well, so I shift my thinking. I say, we're not in a hurry. Let's take the time to talk about what has meaning for us. What do we want to create together? And let's not worry about how many people are involved in it. Now, what you're doing in a network sense is you're aggregating miracles that are happening anyway. You're not taking a miracle and trying to spread it. Okay? Now, you write a book, you're happy when people buy it. But basically, the reader creates the book. I had no idea what book I wrote. I didn't even know it when I was writing it. And when you write a book, you don't know what the hell it's about till it's over. And you write a book just to get this garbage out of my mind. I want new garbage. And and so all of these are little touches of the co-creating commons, all that. And of course you want 1 million people to show up, but you don't want to have the intention of scale. You say this will get aggregated and pulled together when the right spark is lit at the right moment. And I want to be part of anticipating that, absolutely. And we're not in a hurry. How much time does it take? How long does it take to quit smoking? I did it several times. It only took me half a minute. So to me, those are kind of elements of the commons, of the communal world, what you're trying to do.
If I listen underneath that, it's sounding to me what you're saying is go at the pace of life.
And it is the pace of life. Yes, because I know if people in a hurry, nothing's going to change. The biggest fear I have is that, in some ways, although I fear freedom also, is that tomorrow will be just like yesterday. Maybe a little shinier, maybe a little less anxious. It's the beauty of aging. The stakes go down. And so if you don't have a future, don't worry about it so much.
Mm.
Other than, other than knowing I'm going to be over soon. That scares me, but the idea of how is this going? And so trying to find your freedom in contact, in love, in connection with other people. Otherwise, that freedom becomes deep isolation. And let go of the notion of hope. What's that mean? I want to be hopeful.
Yeah.
And so the conversation that you represent is the way in. And so you might say, tip, all you got to focus on really is how to manage the room that you're in. But it's too small. I know it's too small. Talk to God about that. You want a big room? Get a big room. I've been in big rooms. I've been in rooms with 6,000, 7,000 people. And what do you do with that? Well, break them into small groups. That's not what we came for. I know, but if I gave you what you came for, I would be abandoning you. This is not entertainment. Go to a movie if you want to know what you're going to get. And so it takes a long time to have faith in these things and to believe them because they sound so silly and so small. Mm-hmm. And it's the feminine that sees the nuance of experience. The masculine doesn't see any of this. Masculine, speed, scale, height. And, London's building the tallest building in Europe. So bye-bye London. Women wouldn't do that. The feminine wouldn't do that. Mm-hmm. And so I feel leadership is the capacity to manage a room and to confront people with the freedom and to have them meet a stranger and have a conversation they haven't had before. And so the dark side of me telling my story is it's not new. So how do you evoke that? And so it's once you decide, it's embarrassingly simple. Rearrange this room. I spent my life, so have you.
Yeah.
Rearranging rooms against all odds. You go to a big hotel, a conference room, you've done this, and you break them into small groups and break the chairs up and hope the fire marshal doesn't come in. Okay, because the fire marshal wants everything connected with 7-foot aisles. And at lunchtime, you tell the hotel, leave the room the way it is, would you? And you come back and they're always lined up. The chairs have their own will, God damn it, I'm a chair, and I got a hook on the side. I'm hooked up to that chair next to me. I don't care what you. And so the room, the question, context, the absence of long talks, these are all elements that you just have to. But I didn't cover everything I wanted to cover, thank God. And PowerPoint's the worst.
Death by PowerPoint. Death by PowerPoint.
It is death by, and who dies is the PowerPointer. The speaker's the one who's bored. They're sitting up like this. Point number 7. I know what point number 7 is. I can read it. Sorry.
When you look around the world at the moment, so you've spent a long time and engaged in this work, and you've brought other people to it, trained other people, and I love the idea that leadership is about convening. That means anybody can do it. Yeah.
Totally.
Can we get past this point that leadership is a business title, or it has to be somebody at the top of a pointy shape, or any of that kind of stuff? So what story do you think we're in right at the moment, and what are our best possibilities, or what are our other possibilities? Well, there's potentialities in any story field. We could go anyway.
I feel we're on a downward slide. Mm-hmm. Of having internalized the speed, scale, convenience belief system, mm-hmm. and willing to give up our freedom and autonomy in service of convenience. and speed and a predictable future. And, I never lose faith. But in this slide, there's ascension happening at the same time. That if you look underneath and actually talk to people, their lives are coming alive. People are finding each other, connecting. They have to, because the big jobs aren't there. And so we're forced to patch together a living. We're not moving as often as possible. Our cars are older than usual. And I'm going to have to learn to cook. Okay. Don't tell me you're in support of the human condition and you can't cook. I don't want to hear that. So I feel it's a troubled time. You can find data to support anything you want. I just think it's a hard time. And what's so confronting to me is it's happening everywhere. Mm-hmm. But I think the idea of development, so in these early days, John Locke felt that any land that wasn't developed or improved was wasted. Mm. And so now you say, you won't let me build on that lot that you're wasting. How can land be? So I feel there's enormous energy for the environment. There's enormous energy for our children. There's enormous energy to end slavery. Mm-hmm. And the more that energy builds, the more the consumer mind, the authoritarian mind, the predictability mind. I think the love for science and technology is a love for predictability. And so I see that as just part of the slide. And I don't need to know where love is located in my mind. And I don't know. Also, there's this notion that we live in a special time. We don't live in a special time. I just happen to be alive now. We live in a crisis. I've been hearing that for 70 years. I was born in the Second World War. And so that scared me as much as anything that's ever happened. And so I think the fact that we're having this conversation changes everything, because a million other people are having it. And so you could, I just want to give attention to the nature of my participation. Like I do yoga every day. And the reason I do it is I know that I'm aging and I'm going to die. I just want to be aware of the nature of my participation. How am I participating in this next phase of my life? And so I think that's all any of us can do, is say, how do I want to participate in it? And I don't want to hear how great it's going. I don't want to hear how poorly it's going. I'm tired of great cities being so proud of San Francisco and Portland. And if one more wonderful innovation comes out of Seattle, I'm going to court. Nobody is allowed to live on Whidbey Island. It's too beautiful and too many women. So, and then the other thing, every city I go to on the community stuff, they say, oh, Detroit, yeah, we've got more homicides. Chicago, so people are as proud of their suffering as they are of their victories. Neither one is true. You can create wherever you are. And what bothers me is there's just too much suffering, too much poverty in the world. I just don't want to participate in creating it. And so that's kind of where and I think the small group, the conversations you're talking about, the community, the story is to reconstruct a different story. I don't even like the word poor, because as soon as I call you poor, I've declared you broken. And I don't like asking people, is your neighborhood safe? Because as soon as I ask that question, I've declared you dangerous. And I'll never ask you how many years of schooling, because as soon as I ask the question, I've declared you stupid. So that's the real shift in story. To get rid of these deficiency stories and stop internalizing them, and that's the work you're doing, is help people not think their story, especially their story of vulnerability or weakness or myth is true. It's just not true. It's just what you've been named.
So maybe underneath this all, there's a call to create the spaces where people can find each other and can find new ways to weave their stories.
Yes. I would say weave their gifts through stories.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what I'm interested in. What are you good at?
Yeah.
What can I learn from you? What can we do together to heal the woundedness, which will always be there? You're wounded at the moment of birth, is what Peter Castellano. Eve ate the apple because God gave us our freedom. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a strategic error. And so healing that woundedness of being human, to me, that's what you're doing.
And you say that, I love that idea of confronting people with their freedom, but it's confrontational to talk about gifts too, isn't it?
Awful. It is. It's a nightmare. Because if I accepted the fact I had gifts, I would have to admit there's grace in the world. And I'd have to let it into my own soul. And then half my stories would be obsolete. People say, tell me about yourself, Peter. And I go,
oh, can't tell that one.
Exactly. That's when I like not confront in your face way, but these questions, what you're doing with your world. Mm-hmm. And with this process is confronting people with the freedom that they've always had. And nobody shows up for that, but they do.
Maybe one of the reasons it's challenging to show up for that is because if you do, you're not going to be the same at the end of it.
Beautiful statement. That's what scares me more than unpredictability, is that if I do show up, really, I'm in trouble, because I lose all my excuses, all my little routines, all my little habits. And it's frightening and it's exhilarating. I used to feel that way about public speaking. It scared the hell out of me. And so for the first few years, when there was a little audience out there, I would have huge anxiety. And at some point, it clicked on me, maybe this is what I was waiting for. And as soon as that clicked, I would get uneasy, but I wouldn't want to run. And so maybe that freedom is what we're waiting for. We just have to be seduced into experiencing it by a good question and a stranger nearby that's somewhat interesting.
And the power of invitation.
And an invitation that says, come. And the invitation always has a lie involved. Come, we're going to make this neighborhood safe. Come, we're going to build something. We're going to build a place. Who knows what we're going to build? So you always need some bait, some reason, but don't feel bad about that. Mostly people need to get connected, build social fabric. And then then anything we do is important. And without that, we're doomed to ask the medical profession to keep me healthy, police to keep me safe, the teacher to keep me schooled. So this is a way of reducing my addiction to outsourcing and thinking something else can give me what I really care about.
I just had the image of a child pop into my mind because I was visualizing saying to somebody, are you prepared to come on an adventure with me? And, any child worth their salt would be going, yeah.
Please. Please.
I've been waiting for you to come,
Yes.
So what is it in our, somewhere in our lives that switch gets turned off, the safety switch gets turned on?
I say these things as if I believe in what I'm saying, but I think that the moment I went to school and the people I used to play with became my competition. And then my friend Ward Mayart, he says, the moment you turn a learner into a performer, you've stolen a piece of their humanity. And so I think 1,000 of those moments where I somehow perform and somehow doing well, thinking the pie is small, there's only enough for me, all that stuff just steals my humanity and makes me choose safety over adventure, which is a core. I mean, if there was a purpose for God or the church as it began, or as it exists in many places, or anything, it would be to help me together keep choosing adventure, staying alive. And there's no bigger adventure than have a conversation I've never had before. Mount Everest is nothing. You know, I don't want to climb all the walls you want. You know, be a tourist all you want. But in the end, your conversation is the ultimate adventure.
And maybe the ultimate use of story is to help us regain our humanity.
I think so, yeah. And through ending our loneliness and going deeper. See, the consumer world keeps me on the surface. It thinks I can purchase what I need. And I don't mean shopping. It's just the consumer mindset. And so the depth is what you represent. I remember hearing you for the first time stand up and facilitate something for, what was it, Alia or something like that. I just listened to the way you set things up in 4 minutes. And I just resonated to you and the depth and the texture and the tone and the way you told us to do something simple in a name, you know. And so I think you're perfect to do what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for sharing your time talking about story and about community again, and for your long work and thought about it and your heart for it.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to our interview here on Story of the Future Learning Encounter. And if you've been stimulated by what we've been talking about here with Peter, then please come to our Facebook group and share some of that and help us build some social fabric there, one conversation at a time. Thank you all.